Welcome back to the show, everybody. I'm Jeanna.
And I'm Ivo.
Happy Friday, Ivo.
Happy Friday, Jeanna.
That sounded very enthusiastic.
I feel good today.
Yeah, do you?
Yeah, I had a good day today.
You did.
I did. I definitely had a good day today. So
you did. I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah.
You've been kind of stressed the last couple of days.
Well, you know, business will do that to you.
You know, I was thinking about that, and just percolated another potential conversation in my head, but I feel like men and women definitely deal with stress very differently.
Oh, yeah. I agree.
And
without a doubt.
I can always see it in your body. I can always see it in your face. And I feel like you may not be able to tell so much like through my face but like my actions.
I could tell. Yeah, it's definitely not, all right. Yeah,
right?
It's not, you don't wear it on your face like I do. But I could tell by the way you move.
Yes. But I'm definitely more like vocal about it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I wear that shit on my face.
I know. So it was worrying me, but I'm glad to hear that you had a good day today.
Yeah. So hopefully many better days to come in the future. My business is kind of like it's a slow process when it comes to generating the business. It's like almost like a real estate deal. Lots of meetings, lots of back and forth, and then lots of decisions to be made, and then finally something's agreed upon, and then we pull the trigger on something. So the beginning of something new.
Yeah, I knew you were happy when Ivo brought these little mini cheesecakes home, and him and I are on this before the summer lockdown, no drinking,
Absolutely.
and, no crazy eating.
Gotta get your shit right.
He walks in the door with these little mini cheesecakes. I'm like, what are you doing,
It's
man?
a celebration, bitches.
Fucking sabotaging everybody in the house.
Listen,
I definitely ate one of those ASAP.
I don't know what you're talking about. I'm saving my shit for Sunday.
Okay, great. But you'll fuck everybody else up, though.
Discipline.
All right, so let's get into tonight's episode.
Let's get into it.
Episode 115, and it is titled "Say What You Mean: A Healthy Approach to Conflict Resolution."
I need you to find your sweet spot. There we go.
Oh, thanks.
There we go. All right.
Say what you mean.
Yeah. Can you say that again? What are we talking about?
Say what you mean.
Say what you mean.
Yeah.
Say it with your chest.
A healthy approach to conflict resolution.
Definitely a great conversation. I think that
Really, we haven't had it yet.
well, I mean, I think the topic alone, makes for a great conversation.
Yeah, I'm just joking with you. When I had to think about what healthy conflict resolution meant, I had to reflect upon younger Jeanna. And if I looked back 25 years ago, because we're like almost at that point, for me, if I'm thinking about conflict resolution in relationship, more than 25 years ago at this point, starting out, I didn't know what healthy conflict resolution was. I came from a household where my parents were toxic as fuck. And there was really no sort of resolution between them as a couple. It was, using foul language, belittling. There was actually violence, domestic abuse. So having grown up, seeing that, it was difficult for me to kind of wrap my head around how to approach conflict in a relationship healthy and in a positive way. Because growing up as a young woman, one of the ways that I deal with conflict myself, for me personally, not even in a relationship, was I just kind of bottled that shit up and buried it like Pandora's box.
Mm.
And later on in my life, I've come to figure out that is not healthy and possibly one of the worst things that you can do for yourself. So I, found a journey to get myself into a better way.
That's just like a jack in the box.
Jack in the box.
Yeah,
oh yeah, like
you're
just turning the handle.
You're taking your problems and you're just kind of pushing it into a box and then locking the lid down, and then that shit is, through time you're just like cranking that dial until one day that shit just pops out.
Yeah, and luckily I don't feel like it was as bad. I think it definitely unraveled itself little by little, but what I will say is this: one of the things that I did, I guess for lack of a better term, learn when it came to seeking some sort of resolution in a relationship when you're like, faced with an argument or a disagreement, was I learned what I did not like, what I did not want. And because I watched how my parents treated each other, which was extremely poor, I immediately said to myself, once I got into a relationship that I knew that there was true longevity, I was going to implement some foundation things that I were like kind of my starting points. And first and foremost was, when there was a disagreement, we should not be using foul language against each other. There should be no disrespectful comments made towards each other, which people will tend to do when they're in a heated argument. They'll say things that they really don't mean. That's why this episode is called Say What You Mean. And like no low blows. And that was really like all I had. Fast forward to dating Ivo.
I'm sitting here smiling, and I'm just wondering, like, it's amazing how like we were able to stay together, because your approach was to not step into that space as a initial step into a peaceful resolution of a conflict, and I lived in that space. I lived in the explosive, foul, vulgar, hot language, and the fact that we were able to
work it
out and get to where we are today, I think is speaks volumes.
It does. Before Ivo and I decided to choose this topic, there was another topic that I threw out to you, which was losing love. And, once we kind of threw it around a little bit, we were like, I think we want to go in this direction, which is, the conflict resolution. But one of the biggest factors in why I stood in the space with you, Ivo, that I did when I was faced with this explosiveness from you, was there was true love there. There was true value in our relationship. And I was I was definitely able to kind of see past this, like, almost kind of like Dr. Jekyll that would come out from you every now and then. And not to say that it was easy, but I was able to look past it because there was love for you in a way that I had never felt before. And in other instances, in other relationships where I was faced with conflict or I was faced with an argument, I found myself arguing to the fucking tooth and nail because I truly didn't love this person and I wasn't trying to seek any sort of resolution. And the minute that you and I got together, I found myself saying, damn, I'm really upset right now, but I still want to find a way to, like, resolve this between him and I. So I was willing to take that journey with you.
I commend you a lot for that, because
thank you.
It took a long time and a lot of patience for me to recognize, first and foremost, that there was something about me that needed to change. And there was quite a bit of reflection that needed to happen before that. And it almost feels like that, you were I was like a wild boar that you eventually tamed. I used to be like a bucking bronco, and now I'm just like that, that the well-trained horse that like does the dance,
the dancing. It's interesting that you say that. As you put that imagery in my head, one of the first things that pops up to me is Ivo is a Taurus. That's his zodiac sign, and Ivo a lot of the times likes to say, you mess with the bull, you get the horns.
Get the horns, yeah.
Right?
Yeah, and I used to pull those things out.
Yeah, but he didn't realize that he was messing with a goat that would just hop up on the mountain and be like, all right, bro, blow off your steam. I'm going to be up here waiting for you.
And when I say like that I give you a lot of credit for putting up with that. I don't want people to think that like I used to just blow off the hinges and you'd say they're like, you'd be there like, like when I say that
Thanks.
She was able to deal with it, she dealt with it in a goat kind of way, where like, goats, they're tough. Goats, they will go head to head, and stand their ground when they need to. And that's exactly what I mean by that. In many situations, you didn't fold. You stood your ground. You stayed in there in the argument. You didn't let me just win everything over because I was yelling and screaming, or I was highly upset and didn't deal with my emotions. You figured out how to navigate through that in a way where it still allowed us to communicate. You would step back and let me burn off fuel when I needed to, and then come circle back around and keep at the discussion, and we would always resolve what it is that we had an issue with, even though it could be very difficult.
Yeah.
And so for that, I commend you, because that took a lot of time and patience.
I appreciate that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, there were a lot of moments where I was like, all right, I'm gonna let this guy wild out for a second. And when he's done, I'm gonna let him know where he's wrong. But we said a lot about like how I felt and like things that you were able to overcome. I want to ask you a question.
Sure.
What do you think is something that I may have had or currently have that is a negative approach to us resolving conflict? So is there something that in the past I may have done, or is there something that I currently still kind of struggle with when it comes to conflict resolution in like a positive light?
So in the past, there wasn't much struggle going on from your end, because I feel like that you were dealing with a lot of trying to just get to a resolution and deal with the difficulty that it could be that there could be sometimes when I'm upset.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't until I started to come around and really started to learn effective ways of communicating, and I started to realize that all of that yelling and getting upset, losing my temper, walking away, it really meant nothing, because eventually I would have to sit down with you and talk.
Mm-hmm.
So I quickly came to the realization that it's just better to try to stay calm, and focus on the issue rather than the person that I'm having the issue with.
Mm-hmm.
And once I got to that point, then we actually started having really constructive conversations and discussions.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when, like, intellectually it shifted, right?
Mm-hmm.
I feel like intellectually you had an advantage on me, because I was more emotional in the beginning,
mm-hmm.
and you were very strong-minded.
Mm-hmm.
And once I was able to really, dial in with my emotions and kind of get to a space where we can, have constructive conversation about issues that we were having, then you now had to start listening to me, because I was doing a lot more talking. And that's where I found that there was difficulty, because you were so used to just ignoring what I was saying. You used to always have to just kind of like, lean back, and let all of this negative energy that I was blowing at you kind of blow past you. And so you really didn't have to listen to me. You were doing a lot of ignoring, you were ignoring me a lot. And so once the tides turn, now I need you to listen to me. And what I found was that you weren't really that great of a listener. You weren't an active listener. And just
so we're clear, I have said this on the show many times.
Yeah.
Ivo and I actually got into a little spat today
about it. Yeah, I
was not listening to him. And we had a little bit of back and forth, because I felt like I was listening. I just wasn't listening the way that you would prefer me to listen. I was doing it the way that Jeanna does, and sometimes we have to make that balance. But that is a really good observation, Ivo. Yeah. That is so accurately said. As you were saying, I was like, fuck, he got me.
Now that I can talk, I think that sometimes you have a hard time listening or wanting to listen to what it is that I'm actually saying.
100% valid. And it's so interesting that you say that, because in a recent study published, researchers surveyed over 1,000 people and found that communication was the most common source of conflict of all couples.
I hear that.
The other high-ranking conflict topics were household chores, decision-making, finances, problematic partner habits or behaviors, role expectations, screen time, sex, and time management. But the number one was communication.
Mm-hmm.
So as soon as you said that, I was like, wow, this study is also very accurate, because it's like saying exactly what it is that you and I have a little bit of a struggle with, because Ivo is a stellar listener and I am not. Yeah. I'm actively working on it.
And then there's another part of you that I would say
are you gonna keep dragging
struggle
me?
with. It's just there's two that I kind of wanted to bring up that I think it's important to talk about.
Sure.
And hopefully for other people to identify with, and that is you have a lack of empathy.
Towards you or towards humanity?
towards a lot of things.
Yeah.
And to your defense, it has a lot to do with the way that you grew up.
Correct.
You know, you grew up not being able to feel sorry for yourself. And so in turn, you really don't feel sorry for many people or much of what anybody's going on.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you feel like that you had to pull up your pants at a very young age and strap your boots and get shit done. Yeah. And you kind of feel like that if you were able to do it, then, and nobody felt bad for you, then it's almost like you don't have that to give, which is understandable. But it can be difficult when we're trying to resolve conflict where I need you to be empathetic towards something that I was going through. Maybe I did something that didn't sit right with you, and it was because I was going through something and I need you to understand it. And a lot of times you're just like, so? Oh, well.
Yeah.
And that can be challenging because when we're trying to get to an understanding, it's like hitting a brick wall with you. So, but you've become better at it over the years.
Yeah.
I think that it's important for someone who may seem that they are not empathetic to see how important that can be in a relationship when it comes to trying to resolve conflict.
I think the most interesting thing about those two things that you pointed out that I'm not the greatest at, those are Ivo's best attributes.
Those are my, I got muscles in those departments.
Ivo is the most empathetic, best listener I've ever met. And sometimes it drives me a little crazy. I'm just like, he's just over there talking, listening to that person and listening to their sob story and like, you know, patting them on their back. And I'm like rolling my eyes in the background. But I also truly love that about you.
Thank you.
And it's interesting. People will find something truly endearing about their partner in the beginning and then find it to be one of the most fucking annoying things ever later on.
Until it turns against you.
Yeah, 20 years later. So tell me a little bit about like your story when it comes to conflict resolution.
Well, my story when it comes to conflict resolution was that in the beginning I didn't have any. I spent a large portion of my childhood without my parents. So I don't have a lot of memory. I don't have a lot of memories of them arguing. I do have memories of them in conflict, and they were pretty volatile, I guess, for what, a child would consider volatile to be. And I never saw them, physically fist fighting, but a lot of yelling, screaming, arguing.
Yeah.
But it didn't happen for a large portion of my life because there was a time, 7 years of my life, that I spent without them. And in those years, I was living with my grandmother and my uncle and my aunt. And I might as well have been living, in Mr. Rogers' house. My uncle was the most just calm and, self-controlled man. And I'd never heard them argue. So never really had that like difficulty or I felt like challenged with having to resolve conflict. It wasn't until I came back and I started living with my father again that he was very hot-tempered, and that's kind of like how I learned to deal with emotions. He dealt with his emotions that way, and so when it came to dealing with my emotions, that was the only thing that I could reflect on how to deal with them, was just the way that he did. Kind of emulated him. And I idolized my father in a way too, so there was a portion of me that wanted to be strong like him in that sense,
Yeah.
And so I adapted that rather quickly. But when it came to relationships, I realized that I struggled to deal with my emotions, and I wore my emotions on my sleeve and on my chest, and I let it be known.
Yeah.
And a lot of my relationships were like that until I met you. And it took a lot of time, but through watching you and seeing, there was many times after an argument that I would sit back and reflect, and I would admire how like cool, calm, and collective you could be. And I started to want to be like that. So I started to look at myself and realize how in the argument, now looking back at it in hindsight, I look like a monster. And it's kind of hard to see yourself, once you're taking the time to reflect yourself and look at yourself, and you can see yourself as kind of like an ugly monster, and you're realizing that that's the image that you're portraying to everybody around you. Speaking for myself, that didn't sit right with me.
Yeah.
So I kind of had to figure out a way how to be able to wrangle up my emotions and control them. And, I think that through time, patience, dedication, and self-reflecting, many people can change if they're dealing with their emotions the way that I was when I was younger.
Yeah. I think one of the key things that you said in that whole, sharing of like your overall story was you watched how your father handled his emotions and then you emulated it. But what I would say that actually came out of that is you were being taught how to not deal with your emotions, because then you said that later on in the story that you actually weren't dealing with them. And I think your father was doing the same thing.
Right.
He was just blowing up and not really tackling why he was feeling the way he was feeling. I've had some experience with the way that your father did behave when it came to that. Not a lot, but what I will say is that he reminded me of my father in that regard, where this like firewall goes up and it's immediately pointing the finger at everyone else, and just it becomes this like blame game where everyone else is the fucking problem, and there's no reflection upon anything that they have done. And they play this, like, I guess one of the words you could use now is like they gaslight everybody else,
I think that what I saw was, once I realized, looking back at it, I realized that those experiences with my father when he would blow up like that, it was traumatic for me. In the sense to where, I was scared as a little kid, and afraid that, I was gonna, I was gonna be harmed out of his actions. And in return, I would find ways not to upset him. I would try to walk, tiptoe around him in a way where I didn't piss him off. And what I learned was that acting that way means don't mess with me. Because by him acting that way, I would find ways not to mess with him. And so when I found myself in a situation where I didn't want somebody to mess with me, what did I do? I copied and reflected how he would act, trying to get the same results.
Can I just tell you that one of the reasons why I was able to deal with the way that you would behave sometimes when we would argue, when you would become this, like, as you said, this monster, is because growing up, I was faced with a lot of conflict in the streets. I watched a lot of people, and the way that we would say it back on street was they would be a lot of rah-rah. I'd watch people get into fights and there would be all this all this talking and all this hand movement.
Yeah.
And from my experience, a lot of the people that would do that, there was nothing to follow. They were just a lot of talk.
A lot of smoke.
And from my experience, the people that really had the smoke, that really had the work, were the ones that almost said nothing.
Yeah, they didn't talk.
And I learned how to maneuver myself like that through the street. I learned that when I was faced with, conflict, or I had to fight for myself, I didn't say a lot. I just waited for the moment to do what I had to do. There wasn't a lot of talking.
Yeah,
so when I saw you acting that way, I was like, oh, I've seen this before. I'm going to let this guy burn himself out.
Yeah. But what's funny is that my dad was about that action, though. Even
he was about that work.
He was about that work, because I've seen him in action many times.
Well, luckily you didn't mutate into that person.
I mean, as a young kid, I did a lot of times and learned that that's not the type of life I want to live. My dad was ready to die for it. He was ready to throw hands for his pride at any given Sunday.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, he's still like that till today.
Yeah.
And he's 86.
Yeah. So I think we've talked a lot about how being fucked up as a kid has molded us into these volatile adults. I think it would be good for us to share with people some some really good ways to say what you mean,
Do you have any examples on what are good ways to deal with conflict? I am.
Any good ways to resist?
Yeah, any good ways to say what you mean?
That's a good question. You mean like from my own personal experience?
Mm-hmm.
You know, I did say that I learned how to what I didn't want. The first thing that comes to my mind immediately is the one thing that I had to learn earlier than later was seeking a solution is not about finding out who's right in an argument. A lot of the times I found myself when it came to us trying to resolve a conflict, I found myself early on in our relationship really trying to prove a point, really trying to make you see that I was right, versus trying to get us to the end of that tough road that we were walking down. And that made things really difficult because I would be so stubborn. And there was no moving my mindset on a lot of the things that we were going through. So there had to be a lot of self-reflection on my part. And I had to sit back and say, Jeanna, like, what are you doing? You love this man. So why are you not seeking a solution? Why are you trying to prove that you're right? He's not your enemy.
Yeah.
He's your loving partner. So you should be seeking a solution. But in order for me to seek the solution, I had to take my mask off. I had to be super vulnerable with you. And that was so hard for me because vulnerability in my eyes meant weakness. It meant that if I succumbed to some of the requirements that you were asking for in an argument, I was weak. And that was really hard for me. And there are still moments where we have arguments and I still struggle with that. But I'm so much better at saying, all right, your ego does not matter for the true long, loving longevity of this relationship. It does not matter. Let it go, Jeanna.
Yeah.
I more recently have started journaling. And sometimes I write things, and I told you this the other night, that one of the things I have to write in my journal every night is something if something could have gone better in my day, what could it have been? And I find myself writing things like, I wish when me and Ivo, had that little argument, I went about it this way. I find myself reflecting even more now, and realizing how useless my ego can be in our relationship.
That's a great example.
Yeah.
And a great tip. One thing that I know that is very helpful in achieving peaceful resolution is not playing the blame game. I think, myself included, a lot of people will directly try to put blame on someone in a conflict so that they're not the one with the issue. Taking that approach is almost a sure shot in not coming to a resolution in an argument. Saying, oh, this was your fault. This happened because you did it. Using that energy, sorry.
It's okay.
Using that energy to shift the argument and put the spotlight on the person that you're having the conflict with is not a way to come to a resolution. And so one way to avoid that is to look at the issue itself and not look at the person that you're having the issue with as the issue. And I know that kind of sounds a little tricky, but if you think about it, let's just say, you broke this cup. Instead of saying, me being upset with you because you broke the cup, I need to try to focus on, where was the cup? Why did the cup actually break? Was it in a bad place? How can we prevent the cup? How can we prevent the cup from breaking in the future?
Yeah.
Is there maybe we should get a rubber cup? Should we stop buying glass cups?
Yeah.
I'm focusing on the cup, and now together we can figure out how this cup can't break no more, because that's what I'm really upset about. I'm really upset about the cup broke, but I can easily be upset with you because you broke the cup.
Yeah.
And I think that when you shift the energy like that, it makes it a lot easier to resolve. If I'm sitting here saying, we're not, you're going to get defensive.
Yeah.
How are you going to come to a peaceful resolution for somebody that has their hands up like this?
Yeah, like they're trying to like to block themselves in a fight.
Yeah, they're blocking themselves because you're attacking them as a person. And so if you're the type of person that in an argument you really kind of jump down somebody's throat, understand that there's another way to go about that.
Yeah.
Where you can still get to the same result without having to attack the person that you're trying to find the resolution with. I mean, keep in mind you're a team. And so you got to get through it together, and you're not going to get through it together by beating the person over the head, with insults and tearing down their personality, who they are as a person.
Yeah.
So I think that's a huge one. I know it was for me because I used to be like that. I'm guilty of it. I think for me it was very easy to like say, this is all your fault and you need to change. Yeah. You need to figure out how you don't break that cup no more. It's not my problem. That makes it very easy for me to not even have to attempt to come to a resolution for this. It's all your fault, and you need to figure out how you don't do that no more.
And in that moment, you're not a couple.
Yeah, you're not a couple, and then so now you're left feeling frustrated, guilty, angry, confused, with all these negative emotions, and we as a couple have not come to a resolution.
And I think at that point it's even worse because then there's that added level of frustration on the individual partner.
Yeah.
Because you've layered these things on top of they're probably upset with themselves for something that may have happened in the relationship, but now you've piled on this additional guilt. Yeah. And they're left holding that.
And I think that some people may ask like, okay, well, what if it's an ongoing issue? Like, what if Jeanna's breaking glasses left and right?
Yeah.
Okay, so now we have a problem.
Yeah.
Okay, so but it's still, I'm not going to fault you for breaking these glasses. You may have a past trauma, and when glasses are around you, you react in a way where you just don't like them around you.
Yeah.
So I got to figure out how not to put glasses around you. And we got to start now. We got to dig deep and see,
why is this happening?
Yeah. But still not approach it in a way where like this is all your fault.
Yeah.
I just don't think shit get resolved. Shit doesn't get resolved that way.
I completely agree. When it comes to conflict resolution, there's something that when I asked you the question earlier about is there something that I currently am not good at or in the past, and I'll be surprised. I was surprised at your answer. Not to say your answer was very accurate. But the thing that popped into my mind when I asked you that question, I was like, I bet you I know what he's going to say. And I was completely wrong. I thought you were going to say the silent treatment. One of the things that I would consider a huge mistake when you are approaching conflict resolution is avoiding the conflict altogether.
Yeah, agreed.
And I was really good at that. And again, that comes from my childhood and me learning how to just bottle things up. So there were moments where you and I would get into something and it wouldn't be going the way that I wanted. And I would just shut down. And I wouldn't speak to you for several days on end. And I was just avoiding the conflict altogether.
Yeah, the bad part is that I was the same way.
Yes, and I think that was the one thing that you and I, unfortunately, saw eye to eye. And Ivo was like, okay, I'm going to meet you head on with that. You're not going to speak to me. I'm not going to speak to you either. And there was a good, I want to say that there was a good 4 or 5 years that we did this like on and off, where we would just get into something, wouldn't talk to each other for like 3-4 days.
Yeah. And then when we would talk, we realized how stupid that shit was.
And again, it definitely comes from the removing of the ego and saying, because again, for me, it was saying to myself, the point that I was trying to prove wasn't effective. It wasn't coming across to you. And in my mind, I felt like, like what's wrong with him? He's not hearing me. He's not understanding what I'm trying to say. So then what's the point of me even talking anymore? Yeah. But once I really looked at the true issue at hand, I wasn't really addressing the real problem. I was just trying to prove my point.
Mm-hmm. Which kind of like brings me to another issue that people have when they try to resolve conflicts that is definitely a no-no, is coming at the argument with the intent to win.
That was me.
That was you. And that by no means is a healthy way to try to resolve a conflict between you and your partner. Yeah. And I'm guilty of it too. I've done it before where I felt like I was right in the situation, and I'm not going to back down because I need my point to be proven. I need to show that you were wrong in this current situation. And my whole basis on keeping up with this argument is to prove that I'm right.
Yeah.
And that kind of leads to a very toxic situation with, when it comes to two people. Avoiding that is a very easy way to just kind of like, all right, fine. I know I'm right. I don't need to prove it to you. I just need you to understand how I feel and for you to acknowledge it. And that is just, for me, that's the same as proving that I won.
Yeah.
I think so.
And you're saying that, let me just like recap this really quick. So what you're saying is that when it comes to winning per se, if your partner is acknowledging the feelings that you have in that moment, you feel like it's a win for you?
I feel like that is the same thing. So let's just say we're in an argument and I'm just trying to prove that I'm right. And by proving that I'm right means you admitting that you're wrong. Right? Mm-hmm. I think you just acknowledging my feelings without admitting that you're wrong is you telling me that you understand how I feel. You see what it is that I'm trying to say, and you're going to try to make sure that that moving forward you acknowledge that.
Yeah.
And I think that that's what winning is about, right? I think that, when you win, the whole point of winning an argument is moving forward to know that in that situation, I'm right. And you need to make sure that you address that situation anytime we come into that
space.
Yes. Thank you.
Yeah. As you say that, I think one of the first things that pops out in my brain is one of the times we were in therapy and you were speaking, and I could tell that the therapist was very in tune to my body language. Mm-hmm. And I remember her saying to me, she like called to my attention. She was like, you hearing Ivo right now? And I remember, man, I was boiling in my ego at that point. I was just like, God, everything this fucking guy is saying right now. Everything he's saying right now, I just want to knock him into the stratosphere. And it was because everything you were saying was so right. And I just felt like you were burying me deeper and deeper. And I remember the therapist saying to me, how do you feel? That was a turning point for me because she wanted me, one, to acknowledge your feelings, but then she also wanted to know how I felt, like what you were saying, how that made me feel. So it helped me remove that like wanting to win thing, because it still allowed me the opportunity to display my own feelings. And I remember what I said. I said, Ivo comes across so righteous. I was like, he makes me feel like nothing that he does is wrong, because he's this very empathetic, very loving, very active listening man. And I'm over here just fucking not listening, avoiding conflict, playing the silent treatment, doing all these things that, you should not be doing. But I really enjoyed that, kind of like she was playing that devil's advocate of like, okay, great. I need you, I understand you have feelings about what he's saying, but at that moment, I need you to hear him, acknowledge his feelings. And I remember in one of our separate therapy sessions, she reminded me that I have to do that consistently, acknowledge your feelings. She goes, you may not like to hear what he's saying, but you need to acknowledge the way that he feels. And man, there were some times like we'd be laying in bed and you'd say something and I just felt my teeth like biting down. So hard for me. It's because I grew up being this, strong-willed woman that every time I felt like, because acknowledging another person's feelings sometimes means that you're you are taking onto yourself their emotions in some way. And I felt like that meant that I had to be super vulnerable with you. And I don't always like doing that.
See, and for me,
and I have to put myself in your shoes. You know, that's not, I don't feel comfortable doing that.
You know, for me, it was very easy for me to do that when speaking to someone that I wasn't in a relationship with.
Yeah.
It was very easy for me to sit there and listen to whatever it is that they're saying, because I didn't have any emotional ties to them. So I could actively listen to them and then kind of reflect on what it is that they said, acknowledge that I was listening to them, and kind of give some type of guidance or suggestion or my own personal opinion on what it was that I felt would be helpful for them in that moment. And all of it led, all of it kind of made great conversation. But when it came to being in a relationship with somebody, because in the beginning I had a hard time dealing with my emotions, combining the empathy and dealing with my emotions at the same time became almost next to near impossible. So it was hard for me to be empathetic in those situations because I was emotional in those times. And so once I learned how to kind of like tweak them and dial in my emotions, that became a very powerful shift for me, and then I could actually actively listen to you. And even though like I would, they were emotional moments, I could still set my feelings aside, listen to you, and then kind of show you and tell you like, oh, I see you. Yeah. I hear what you're saying to me, and acknowledge those things in a way that moving forward, I made sure that I showed you that I will always acknowledge those things. And so because you kind of like struggle to actively listen to the degree that I do, I feel like you tune out at certain points in the conversation and you miss a lot of what it is that I'm saying. And then in the future, you end up tripping over things that you're not supposed to, which kind of like leads to more conflict down the road. Yeah.
There was definitely a power shift between you and me and the way, like the way that I look at things, and you said it before, I definitely had that upper hand when it came to our conflicts. I always walked away going, yeah, I got that one,
because he shot up like a rocket, lost all of his fuel, came crashing down, and now he's like walking around rubbing his ass because he fell flat on his face, and yet you're still all cool, calm, and collective. Meanwhile, like I went to hell and back, and I was a hot mess.
And now when we go head to head, let's be real, there are times that we go head to head, I find myself like really having to implement like real strategy. Jeanna read The Art of War just to try to like, find ways around some of these,
like sharpening her blades and shit.
To try to find my way around some of these arguments, because even though I have said that seeking a solution is the point in all of this, right? If you're in a loving, because I want to stress that the key is if you're in a loving, healthy relationship, because in no way, shape, or form are Ivo and I trying to tell you to go out there and to support your partner that is abusing you, verbally, emotionally, physically, treating you poorly. I'm not saying stick around and take this person's bullshit, but when the relationship is healthy and there's love, of course you want to seek a solution, right? But that doesn't mean that it's like, that it's always easy between you and I. And I find myself a lot of the times still struggling with that like demon inside of me. And I have to implement, I've read quite a few books to try to find ways to implement new strategies into conflict resolution, because it's not that simplistic of saying, okay, great, I love him, let's figure this out. No, there literally has to be things that are put into play. Boundaries have to be put into, rules have to be set. Yeah. So that's an active, but I think the key is that you remain committed to it. One of the things that I despise is when someone says, I'm going to do this for the betterment of our relationship, and they do it for a week and then they fall off. Yeah. And that's something that you're very adamant about too. You like that consistency. And I think that that is really important in a relationship, that your partner is committing to remain consistent in these resolutions that are being put into place. Because if they're not, then you're going to find yourself right back in the same position. And it's very possible that it's actually going to be worse than it was the first time around, because now you have that added level of frustration of them saying that they're going to do something, they haven't done it, and it's still that same behavior that got you into that conflict to begin with.
Yeah. As you were talking,
Mm-hmm.
I remembered something that you used to do that used to be very effective in dealing with my blow off top moments.
Okay.
And you stated
Stroke
earlier
my ego a little bit.
You stated earlier in the show that one of your like what is it? Oh, so one of like your main like do not do's in a relationship was that, there was no foul language, cursing, and disrespecting.
Yeah.
And whenever I crossed that line, which it did in the beginning, you had an interesting way of dealing with it. And that was when the argument was done, you would never let that slide.
Yeah.
And when I say that she would never let that slide, like, okay, fine, I may have cursed and, it's been foul-mouthed, and these are obviously all things that she doesn't stand for. And even though they happened in that conversation, once the conversation was over and we came to a resolution, I would get like the cold shoulder. Jeanna wouldn't talk to me for however long it took for me to come around and address the fact that I said what I said, acknowledge that I said it to her, apologize directly for acting that way, and promise to work on making it better. Every time I crossed that line, it was like there was no like oh, we're not going to just brush this under the carpet. This is good. This has to be acknowledged. It also has to be apologized for and addressed every single time. And I got tired of kind of like having to come back to you with my tail between my legs and like, oh, babe, I'm sorry. Like I shouldn't have acted that way until eventually I stopped acting that way.
I commend you, because I think that took a lot of removing of your own ego, right?
Yeah,
for you to say, wow, Jeanna is showing me that there's actually no value in the way that I'm behaving right now.
Yeah.
I think for you, I just recognize that, when you became a fire, I just could not add to that.
Yeah, which is...
I needed to, and I'll be honest, I wasn't trying to snuff you out. I wasn't trying to add to you. I was just going to let you burn out on your own, because I felt like that was the only way that you needed to have self-reflection. You needed to see yourself in that own light, which you ended up doing. But like you said, and I thank you for that, I always brought it to your attention, like, hey, you said this, you did this, just so you know, this is how that made me feel. This is why this is not effective. And if you say you love me and you want to be with me, is this how you should talk to your partner?
And listen,
or act towards your partner?
I love the fact that you're repeating what you're saying, because it really ties into what we were speaking about earlier, how you're not putting fault on the person, but rather speaking about the issue.
Yeah.
Once we were done arguing and it was like, okay, maybe that day, I forgot to do something that I was supposed to do, and that's why we're arguing. And I keep forgetting to do it, and so it's an ongoing issue. So we're arguing about that. And in the argument, I get hot and I start cursing, like, what the fuck, like I work all the time. This is bullshit. Like, I can't fucking deal with it, and like it just turns to that, which obviously you don't want me talking like that anyway. So once we resolve the fact that, like, all right, I'm gonna work on not forgetting this thing, then there was another issue now that like I had to like come to terms with, like, all right, so now there's that. Win this conversation, and you would say all of that, like, I don't like being spoken to like this, and I don't speak to you that way. I respect you. You would say, I don't think it's helpful, for me to be adding all of these insult comments and words in a situation that's already hostile. It doesn't help the conversation. And you would just explain to me how the way that you went about speaking in our conflicts was more constructive toward resolving it than going about it the way that I was. Yeah. And I thought that was like, you were like basically playing chess when it came to like trying to win me over in that situation, and you eventually got checkmate.
But I'll just say this. Ivo played with matches one too many times with me, and a bitch fucking blew her top. And I was just like, so you know.
You can only get pushed into a corner so many times.
Just so you know, that exists inside of me. That little monster that comes out of you is in this bitch too. I remember that time you saw that. You looked at me like, yeah, so I'm just gonna, you could just drop me off right here. Because there's a demon inside of you right now.
Jeanna was like, hey, yo, bitch.
Yo, you know I'm from the streets. Fucking touching me like that. Yeah. Right? No, but real talk, like that's that I snapped. And I had to, do a little self-reflection on myself. That's happened, maybe a handful of times. But
see, that's the thing. Like sometimes you have to show what's on the other side of that line. Yeah, you have to show what's behind that red door that never opens. You know what I mean?
Ivo opened Pandora's box and he found what was in there.
I kept poking at that door, like, what's in there? What's in there? And she's like, don't go in there. Don't trust me. You do not want to go in. And I'm like, yeah, I do. I want to know what the hell's in there. I want to know everything about you. I close that door real quick. Nope, I don't want to know that shit. Just keep that shit closed behind that fucking door.
There was a, and just like to wrap up this episode, I'll never forget when Ivo and I first started dating. I used to work at a car dealership, and a lot of the guys that I worked with, all men, and a lot of the guys when they met Ivo, they were like, how you deal with this bitch? She's not nice. He was like, I don't know what you're talking about. She's nice to me.
She's nice to me.
Yeah, I was not nice to them.
Yeah. So I just want to read something real quick before we wrap up this episode, which I think that is gonna kind of bring bring everything kind of full circle. And that is, everyone has different ways of coping with emotions and conflict. With time, support, and effort, a person can learn healthy ways of dealing with their emotions and resolving conflicts in their relationship. For me, it started with self-reflecting, acknowledging things that I need to change about myself, and becoming a better communicator with my partner. And I think that, in that fashion, anybody can turn a tense situation between them and their partner over time into something that is a very healthy relationship when it comes to resolving conflict.
Yeah, but you have to remain committed. You can't say you're going to do something and not do it.
Yeah, well, that's why I said with time, support, and effort. Yeah. So with time, support, and effort, we were able to turn things around.
Yes. But I still be looking to win a fight. No, I'm just joking. Just joking. Like I always say, Ivo, it was a pleasure talking to you.
Likewise. Always a pleasure.
I am so forward looking to this weekend to do absolutely nothing.
Oh, Ava's looking to do something because she was already asking.
That's nice. It's going to be brick as fuck.
It is.
And if you're in New York or New Jersey, so stay your ass in the house, do a Netflix and chill.
Mm-hmm. Hopefully you got a fireplace.
Yeah, order some pizza, maybe get some wine. I don't know. Do whatever it is that makes you feel cozy and comfortable with your partner. Just enjoy some downtime. Maybe have some good conversation. Me and you will love to do that. Find some movies. Black Panther Wakanda Forever is out on Disney Plus.
Or just hop on YouTube and go back to any one of our episodes and start.
Yo, word, real talk.
Shit.
Plug that shit. Until next time, Ivo.
Till next time.
Yo, peace out.
Peace out.